The sand melts under the sun. Armor becomes red hot to such a degree that it can only be held through cloth. From the mouth, a dry metallic taste as if drinking blood. Legionaries fall to their knees, squeeze the last drops from their wineskins, and drink vinegar diluted with water. There is almost no water left. 120 days have passed without rivers, without wells, without rain. How did the Roman army manage to survive in such a hell? And why did this campaign forever change their understanding of strength and endurance? The answer is hidden in one strange mixture: sour, pungent, salvific. Historians report that during the Second Punic War in the years from 218th to 201st BC, Roman legions crossed the North African deserts, fighting against the army of Carthage. According to Polybius's testimony, in these campaigns, warriors marched for weeks under the scorching sun without access to water sources. There was not enough water even for animals, and horses, according to chroniclers, perished first. At such moments, a strange liquid became salvation, a weak acid solution which the Romans called posca. It was a mixture of vinegar and water, something like an ancient isotonic drink. The sour liquid not only quenched thirst but also killed microbes, preventing diseases. Later, this drink became known by the name posca and was even mentioned by Pliny the Elder. Imagine, legionaries stand in formation under a shower of sand. Their bodies are covered with salt, their lips cracked, their eyes inflamed from the wind. They share a sip of the sour drink among themselves, and this sip is life. The vinegar burns the throat, but returns strength, as fire returns warmth to a frozen body. Without it, the legion would have died before reaching the enemy. The weight of each legionary's equipment in that era reached 30 kilograms. On their back, armor. On their belt, a gladius sword. On their shoulders, food for several days. But the heaviest burden was not the armor, but thirst. The sun of Africa knew no mercy. Sand winds turned the air into a dusty wall, and the temperature rose above 40 degrees. Legionaries walked slowly, step by step, maintaining order, because any breach of discipline in such conditions meant death. They moved in a column, divided into maniples, small detachments of 120 men. This was the heart of the Roman army, a structure that allowed order to be maintained even amidst chaos. A maniple, from the Latin word manipulus, literally a handful. In this handful lay the strength of the entire empire, and yet discipline could not abolish the laws of the desert. Water was scarce, and every step became a test of faith and endurance. Polybius wrote that the warriors began to see mirages, distant shadows resembling lakes in which the sun was reflected. But when they approached, there was only dust. In such campaigns, the concept of enemy became blurred. The real enemy was not the Carthaginian, not Hannibal's elephant, but thirst itself, and it was against it that the Romans learned to fight, with the cold methodicalness of engineers building roads through lifeless lands. They devised a ritual, almost sacred. Before dawn, each legionary received a portion of posca, 3 sips. This was enough to get through another day. Thus, the Romans learned to subdue even the desert, not by sword, but by patience, not by victory, but by survival. And yet, ahead of them, awaited a campaign that would question even their legendary endurance. There, where every drop disappeared, and the earth seemed hostile to life itself. Because one day, the Romans went where even vinegar ceased to save. The sand underfoot turned into ash. The North African heat reached such intensity that oak shields began to warp and sandal straps to melt. The army marched across lifeless plateaus towards Numidia, modern-day Algeria, where Carthage's allies sheltered their detachments. This campaign, under the command of Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, became one of the most difficult in Roman history. And although the battle had not yet begun, the legions were already losing men, not from the sword, but from the sun. Ancient sources report that the Romans set out before dawn when the sand was still cool. With the first rays of the sun, the column stretched for many kilometers. Each legionary carried not only weapons, but also a share of the common burden: tents, poles, tools for digging trenches. This load could reach 40 kilograms. They economized water to the last drop, 1 wineskin per day, sometimes for 2. When the liquid ran out, they resorted to an old military stratagem, diluting vinegar with water from swamp pits, filtering it through the fabric of their cloaks. Such a device was called coulira, a fabric filter. It became a salvation from fever and dysentery, which decimated armies faster than the enemy. Scipio ordered the legionaries to use filters at every water source, even if it was a dirty puddle. Pliny wrote that those who disobeyed the order died within a few days. In these campaigns, even shadows were a luxury. Legionaries placed shields into the ground, creating fragile awnings. The sun burned so intensely that the iron on their helmets left burns. Salt was scarce, so military commanders began to issue vinegar to the warriors not only for drinking, but also for rubbing on their bodies. The acid reduced inflammation and cleansed wounds. Thus, Pascha became not merely a drink, but a symbol of survival. One ancient chronicler wrote that the Romans smelled more of vinegar than of blood. This smell permeated their skin, clothes, and weapons. Legionaries joked that they themselves had become pickled meat, carnum acetosam, but beneath this joke lay despair. For day after day, week after week, the campaign continued. The path led through salt plains, where the horizon shimmered like the surface of the sea. People lost their orientation. Officers, centurions, ensured that no one strayed from the path. A centurion was an experienced veteran, a commander of approximately 80 men, and his word was law. In the heat, the centurion walked ahead, checking the pace, setting the rhythm, sometimes raising his vitis staff, a symbol of authority, and encouraging those who began to falter. At night, the Romans built a camp, castra. This camp was like a city. Regular rows of tents, fortified ramparts, patrols on the perimeter. Even in the middle of the desert, they erected walls. Polybius wrote that the Romans knew no rest, but in this lay their salvation. Every evening, some dug ditches, others gathered brushwood, and a third group repaired weapons. No one had the right to be idle. And yet, despite the iron discipline, the fear of death hung in the air. The sun spared no one. Horses collapsed, pack animals suffocated, wineskins emptied. Some legionaries began to drink animal blood, mixing it with vinegar. To a modern person, this seems like madness, but in the Roman army, survival was a duty, not a choice. Scipio understood. The army's morale rested not only on oaths, but also on hope. He introduced a new ritual. Before each dawn, officers walked through the ranks and loudly called out the name of each legionary. This was a way to remind them that they were alive. If your name did not answer, it would be erased from the tablet, and your place would be taken by another. Archaeologists found the remains of camps from that time: burnt-out fire pits, charred bones, fragments of wineskins soaked in vinegar. Even 2,000 years later, the smell of acid can be detected in these places. And yet it was precisely there, on the border between the desert and the sea, that Scipio made a decision that changed the course of the war. He understood. One cannot wait by the sea for water. War in Africa demanded new rules, not only the strength of the sword, but also the ability to deceive the desert itself. Thus began the preparation for a great maneuver, a march without water, a 3-day journey across land where even lizards perished from thirst. 3 days that would decide whether Rome would rule the world or dissolve like a drop of vinegar in the sand. Before dawn, the entire army stood in silence. The wind from the south brought hot sand, and it seemed as if the earth itself was breathing fire. Scipio gave an order that stunned even hardened warriors. We march without water. 3 days, over 100 kilometers across barren plains. He knew that 1 in 10 might perish from this order, but retreat would cost the entire legion. Carthage's army stood beyond the mountains by the springs. To take them by surprise, the Romans had to traverse a path no one had yet taken. Historians believe this occurred around 203 BC, during the campaign against Hanno, an ally of Hannibal. Scipio understood that the Carthaginians were confident the Romans would not dare to cross the desert, and so he decided to do the impossible. To maintain discipline, he ordered the posca, vinegar with water, to be distributed equally among the maniples, a few amphorae per 100 men. This was not merely a drink, but a symbol of their oath. Everyone who drank knew they were drinking their share of the chance to survive until the end of the march. The warriors moved at night, orienting themselves by the stars and ash-colored rocks. At dawn, they arranged their shields, forming a tortoise, a battle formation called a testudo. Usually it protected against arrows, but now it became a defense against the sun. The shields covered their heads, and they marched beneath them as if under a tent. Outside, the heat melted the air. Inside, it was stuffy, but at least a little darker. The first day passed in profound silence. Every step was taken through pain. Sweat poured into their eyes, lips cracked, tongues stuck to their palates. The vinegar in the wineskins was warm, sour, but salvific. The warriors took small sips to prolong life. One centurion, according to chroniclers, died without drinking a single drop. He left his share to the younger men. Thus, the expression vinegar of honor appeared in the army. On the second day, the heat became unbearable. The sand began to shimmer like glass. Legionaries who were running out of posca wrapped their heads with damp cloths soaked in vinegar to slightly reduce the heat. Scipio ordered the standard-bearers to advance to the front so the ranks could see their objective, the legion's eagle. This eagle became the only thing one could look at without being blinded by the sun. By the evening of the second day, the wind changed. A storm rose above the horizon. First, like light smoke, then, like a wall. Sand moved in waves, stifling breath. The warriors covered their faces with cloaks, forming living barriers with their shields. The storm lasted several hours, and when everything quieted down, half of the wineskins were buried in sand. Posca mixed with dust, but the Romans still drank it. The vinegar burned their throats, the sand crunched on their teeth, but it was life. On the third day, fainting spells began. Horses fell to their knees, warriors dragged each other. Scipio walked on foot, alongside the legionaries, to show that the march was not an execution, but a test. Sources report that he himself carried a wineskin on his shoulder, though by rank he could have ridden. His example became the last bastion of morale. When the sun reached its zenith, black rocks appeared in the distance. People thought it was a mirage, but the smell of salty wind confirmed. The sea was ahead. Beyond the rocks lay an oasis at the mouth of the Bagrata River. There stood the Carthaginian camp, confident that the Romans had perished in the desert. The soldiers almost ran the last kilometers. But, as Appian wrote, when they reached the water, Scipio halted the column and ordered them to wait. He knew that the thirsty, rushing to drink, could die from stomach spasms. The legionaries stood, trembling with thirst, while officers diluted vinegar in amphorae. Only then were they allowed to drink. The first sip was like a return to life, sour, cold, painfully sweet. The Romans survived, but now they knew the price of that word. Their bodies were scorched by the sun, their lips wounded, but their eyes full of fury. When the Carthaginians saw Scipio's army marching through the desert, they thought they were seeing ghosts. No one believed that people could march 100 kilometers without water. This crossing went down in history as the March of Posca, one of the most incredible trials of antiquity. And it was precisely this that allowed Scipio to unexpectedly attack the enemy camp, break their forces, and open the way to the decisive battle for Carthage. But the price of victory was not only in blood, it was in the thirst endured together. Those who survived this march were forever changed. They said that after the desert, there was no fear. that a man who had tasted vinegar instead of water no longer feared death, and it was with such warriors that Scipio entered Zama, the place where the fate of the world was decided. The sun over Zama rose slowly like a molten disk. The day of October 20th, 202 BC, became the last for Carthage, and a day of triumph for Rome. After the terrible crossing of the desert, Scipio's legions approached the fields of Zama, a scorched plain where Hannibal had set up his last camp. His army consisted of 40,000 warriors and 80 war elephants. The Romans had just over 35,000 men, but in their eyes burned the same vinegary fire that had helped them survive 120 days without water. Historians debate the exact troop dispositions, but one thing is clear. Scipio knew he faced a legend. Hannibal, the man who crossed the Alps, a genius of maneuver and deception. But now the roles had reversed. The Romans, having survived the desert, looked like living statues of salt. Their bodies scarred, their skin darker than bronze, their breath smelling of vinegar and sweat. As they arrayed in battle lines, it seemed as though the very earth trembled. Scipio employed a unique formation, the triarii. These were veterans, the last line, the army's bulwark. Usually they were committed to battle only when the outcome was decided, but today they stood closer to the center. The Romans formed 3 lines, leaving corridors between them. This maneuver was intended to counter Hannibal's main trump card, the elephants. When the enormous beasts charged, trumpets blared, and Roman warriors struck their shields with spears. The din was so tremendous that the animals panicked, veered off, and trampled their own soldiers. Polybius wrote that Scipio not only won, he foresaw everything, even the wind. Dust, stirred up by hooves, flew into the faces of the Carthaginians. For the Romans, the sun was at their backs. But the main weapon was not the sun nor steel, but the fact that each of these men had already died inside, there, in the desert. They feared nothing. The clash lasted several hours. Warriors met face to face, shields broke, the sand darkened with blood. Scipio observed from a hill, giving signals to the tribunes, officers commanding the maniples. A tribune was like a battalion commander. He didn't just maintain order, he inspired, shouted, and led the front ranks. One such tribune, according to legend, lost an eye in the storm during the crossing, and now, half blind, fought with desperate fury, as if wanting to prove that Romans saw with their hearts, not their eyes. When the fronts converged, the Romans utilized their secret advantage, the power of endurance. The African heat, which had been a curse for many armies, now worked for them. They were accustomed to the sun, to the dry air, to the dust on their lips. While the Carthaginians gasped for breath, the Romans breathed steadily, as if this were their natural element. Scipio ordered the cavalry to advance on the flanks, the light Numidian cavalry, which had defected to Rome. It was led by Prince Massinissa, Scipio's ally. When the cavalry struck from both sides, Hannibal's formation broke. His army turned into a rout, and the battle became a massacre. The Romans did not shout. They advanced silently, step by step, as during the march through the desert. Every movement was precise, cold, measured, as if they were pouring upon the enemy the very acid that had burned their throats all these months. Hannibal, according to Appian, understood that defeat was inevitable. He dismounted, removed his helmet, and gazed for a long time at the field where thousands of his warriors lay. He said, "I have seen many battles, but not one so merciless." This moment marked the end of the Second Punic War. Carthage fell. After the battle, Scipio stood amidst the ashes. The wind carried the scent of vinegar, remnants of posca, which was poured on wounds. The warriors washed themselves with it, as if performing a ritual of purification. One legionary wrote on a stone with charcoal, "Aqua non fuit, sed vinum asceti." There was no water, but there was vinegar. This inscription, according to archaeologists, was preserved in the fragments of a camp near Zama. It became a symbol not merely of victory, but of the fact that Rome knew how to conquer, not with the sword, but with will. Vinegar became their holy water, thirst their trial, the desert their forge. After Zama, Scipio earned the epithet Africanus, not for victory, but for conquering the very land where man was not meant to survive. But his army knew otherwise. Africa was conquered not by swords, but by patience, not by strength, but by the ability to keep going when one could no longer. And somewhere in the dust of Zama, among the dead, the wind lifted dry leaves. Silence returned to the field where the fate of two worlds had been decided. But for the Romans, this was not the silence of an end. It was the breath of a new era. When the last sounds of battle faded, a silence hung over the plain of Zama, not solemn but viscous, like smoke after a fire. Bodies lay in layers, and the sand, recently dazzling white, had turned brown. The Romans collected the wounded, raised their standards, lit camp torches. All of this resembled not a victory, but survival. After 120 days without water and 3 days of hell in the desert, victory felt not like joy, but like agonizing exhaustion. Historians report that out of Scipio's 35,000 warriors, about 30,000 remained after Zama. Losses accounted for approximately 1/5 of the army, but the morale of the surviving men was incredible. Tacitus wrote that no army before them knew how to rejoice in survival as much as in victory. The warriors did not drink wine, did not celebrate. They sat by the fires and gazed into the flames. Their faces were scorched by the sun. Their eyes gleamed in the darkness, like those of beasts escaped from a trap. The surviving horses drank from amphorae with vinegar mixed with rainwater. For the first time in many months, a brief shower passed over the camp. The warriors collected water in cloaks, in their palms, in helmets. No one spoke. Even the tribunes were silent. Only the sound of falling drops and the hiss of campfires as moisture touched the embers. This scene became legend. Rain over Zama, like a blessing from the gods upon those who endured. The next day, Scipio ordered the legions to form ranks. He did not deliver a speech as expected. He simply walked along the lines and touched each shield. This ritual would later be called contractatio, a test of strength after battle. In this way, the commander showed he recognized each fighter. Those who survived Africa became living symbols of Rome. The army marched towards Carthage. The city, once gleaming with purple and gold, greeted them with silence. Its walls still stood, but fear reigned within. The Carthaginians themselves opened the gates. After 20 years of war, they understood. The strength that defeated them was not in iron, but in people capable of endurance. Rome did not just win a battle. It forged a new type of soldier for whom pain, hunger, and thirst became part of service. The Roman army was now not merely an instrument of conquest, it became a machine of survival. Archaeological findings show that after the African campaign, new standards for rations appeared in Roman camps. Instead of wine, diluted vinegar was issued on long marches, in memory of Pascha. Even centuries later, legionaries called this drink the drink of Africa. One of the most important consequences of this campaign was a change in military training. Scipio introduced mandatory marches under the sun, training in arid regions. The term "march without water" entered Latin chronicles as an expression of discipline. A soldier capable of enduring the desert was considered worthy of any battle. The Romans absorbed a lesson that no school could teach. Victory is born of suffering, but only if it is meaningful. Contemporaries wrote that after the war, Scipio often returned to Africa in his dreams. He said that the desert taught him to see eternity. When asked what was the most terrifying, he did not name Hannibal. He replied, "The silence before dawn, when we knew there was no more water." The army returned to Rome several months later. People came out into the streets, threw flowers, played flutes, but the warriors, accustomed to sand and vinegar, stood motionless, like stone. It seemed to them that the noise of the city was a mirage, and real life remained where every sip was an act of heroism. On the Capitoline Hill, Scipio offered a sacrifice to Jupiter. He poured a bowl of vinegar onto the ground, in memory of those who died of thirst. This gesture forever entered history. Pliny wrote that the Romans poured not wine to the gods, but that which saved them from death. After the Second Punic War, Rome entered an era of dominance, but the very idea of victory had changed. If before it was measured by the number of captured cities, now it was by the number of endured trials. The path from the Tiber to Africa became a symbol not of conquest, but of overcoming. And yet within this new strength lay a shadow, the shadow of the desert, where man first realized his limits are wider than they seem. Rome conquered Africa, but at the same time Africa forever settled in the soul of Rome, hot, merciless, endless. When the sun rose again over the Tiber, one of the veterans told a young recruit, "If you want to know what Rome is, try vinegar in the heat." And in these words was everything, the memory of thirst, of life on the edge, of the strength that is born where water ends. Years passed. Scipio Africanus lived out his days on his estate near Laurentum, quietly, almost in exile. Political enemies in Rome envied his glory, accused him of abuses, and demanded an account of his spoils. He refused. "I gave Rome all I had," he said. "Let it decide what to do with it." At dawn, he would go into the garden and watch the sunrise. In his hands was always the same wooden cup from which he drank in the desert. He would fill it with water, add a few drops of vinegar, and raise it to his lips. This taste, sour, burning, was for him a reminder of where human strength begins. Legend says that before his death, he ordered the words to be carved on his tombstone, "In grata patria, neosa quidem mea habebis." Ungrateful homeland, you will not even have my bones. But there is another version, less bitter, that next to these words, he asked to have a second line inscribed. Aqua defuit, sed virtus fuit. Water was lacking, but valor was present. This phrase passed through the centuries. It was written on barracks walls, on shields, in letters. For legionaries, it became a code of survival, a reminder that strength is not in luxury or in bread, but in the readiness to keep going when all around is only dust and sun. And wherever a Roman camp stood, by the walls of Carthage, on the banks of the Rhine, or in the snows of Britain, there was always someone who, in the evening, before sleep, poured vinegar into a cup, raised it to their lips, and quietly said, "To those who endured."